Most of us have what we call anxiety-inducing memories from childhood. For some, it's a close encounter with a fiercely barking dog, for others, a fall from a height. These events reside in the back of our minds until present-day occurrences trigger their re-emergence. Unfortunately, I am not one of those whose repressed memories evoke only a slight bewilderment and a sense of déjà vu. My recently resurfaced images of the past have forced me to relive an indescribable horror, one I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I hope that by pouring all of this onto paper, I can dull my fear a little, and perhaps even find a way to overcome it. It happened when I was 12 or 13, I can't say for sure, before we moved. We lived in a small, dilapidated two-story house. Like many kids my age, I spent most of my time outside until late at night. Sandboxes and playgrounds held little interest for us. Our usual hangout was the woods behind the garage cooperative. The entrance was a barely visible path that disappeared around the corner of a neighbor's shed. That's where we really let loose. The clearing was fully equipped to meet our needs, a treehouse made of old boards, a hut of branches, a makeshift table, and much more. None of the adults ever bothered to check on us, so we could do whatever we pleased. The boys tried smoking for the first time, and some even brought carbide or firecrackers. Only after a poorly managed campfire singed one of the garage walls did our parents start chasing us away. But we still secretly ran off there, venturing deeper into the woods and expanding our playground. That's how we encountered something that forever killed our desire to set foot in that cursed place. That day, my friends Laura and Charlie and I were, as usual, sitting in the treehouse, bored. Board games and magazines no longer brought us joy, so we sat listlessly, each lost in thought, exchanging phrases every now and then. The heat, which had been baking us for a week, didn't help our enthusiasm either. Suddenly, Laura perked up and conspiratorially said, "Hey guys, I bet I can hide so well that you'll never find me." "What are you talking about? Are you going to play hide-and-seek in this stuffy heat?" Charlie lazily groaned. "Come on, let's go, there's nothing else to do," Laura insisted, already standing near the exit of our hideout. "Laura, wait, we're just going to get all hot and bothered and sweat like pigs. I really don't want to wander around the bushes in this swarm of mosquitoes," my friend pleaded. "Well, you guys stay here, I'm going," Laura pouted, stepping onto the first rung of the ladder. At that point, Charlie stood up and addressed our friend. I knew he had feelings for her, so he didn't want to leave her alone without his company. "Listen, Laura, just sit here, you'll get lost, and then we'll have to search for you." Charlie clearly couldn't find reasonable reasons to stop her. Laura, in response, squinted mischievously and shouted, "Last one down is a rotten egg." With those words, she leaped down. Charlie and I jumped up, but only managed to see the hem of her speckled dress disappear into the green thickets. Like the action heroes we watched on videotapes, we split up to encircle our friend, but each time we only ran into each other. All the while, Laura's laughter echoed from the left, then the right, and I couldn't understand how she could maneuver so quickly in such dense vegetation. Exhausted, I called out to Charlie, gasping for air. My friend answered from about 20 meters away, his voice also hoarse from running. We pushed our way through the bushes and sat down to rest. My friend kept listening and looking around, as if suspecting that Laura was somewhere nearby, sitting and laughing at us, fools that we were. And his intuition was right, because from somewhere in front of us, Laura's pealing laughter rang out. We jumped up and rushed toward the sound with renewed energy. We had completely forgotten that we had strayed several kilometers from home and wandered into the real wilderness. After 10 minutes of stumbling through impassable ravines, we came to a marshy clearing. Pushing aside the prickly spruce branches, Charlie and I froze in amazement. Before us stood a wooden house leaning to the left. The boards on the facade, as well as the foundation, were swollen and darkened by moisture. The windows were boarded up and covered with torn plastic sheeting, the kind used to cover garden beds. The roof, covered with shingles rotten with age, was riddled with holes and gaps. Charlie raised his eyebrows in amazement. We glanced at each other warily. Could Laura have climbed into this shack? And then, as if to confirm our thoughts, Laura's figure emerged from the doorway. Charlie and I cried out in fright. My friend, not at all embarrassed, pointed at us, laughed, and disappeared into the darkness of the structure. Laura, you little rascal, we're gonna get you. Charlie roared, full of adrenaline. Wait, there's a swamp up to your knees, you'll dive in and disappear. Laura, come out, we give up. I tried to stop my heated friend, while trying to shout to our friend. How did she get in there if there's a swamp all around? Fly in by air or something? Still full of rage, Charlie was panting. How should I know, but I'm definitely not going in there, I replied. Charlie strained his throat and called Laura again, but she didn't answer. I began to think of the worst things. What if she, God forbid, fell under the rotten floor and sank into the swamp up to her neck? Time passed, nervousness grew, and tension grew with it. The silence only poured fuel into the fire. Laura didn't respond, no matter how hard we shouted. Okay, I'm calling the adults. You, Charlie, watch her in case she wants to come out herself. I'll be right back. I had already taken 10 steps when suddenly Laura's ringing voice reached us from the house, like a peal in an empty room. Don't need the adults. I'm here. Come here. I was dumbfounded, and before I could find something to say, Charlie yelled. Laura, it's really not funny anymore, come out and let's go home, our parents will be worried. They won't be, come here quickly, I'll show you something, the cheerful voice said from the darkness. I was very angry at Laura, not only because she scared us to death, but now she's still sitting there and mockingly taunting us. I had already drawn breath to properly scold our restless friend when a voice came from the house. Don't need the adults. I'm here. Come here. Charlie turned to me. In his eyes, one could read incomprehension and a veil of gradually building fear. They won't be. Come here quickly. I'll show you something. Again, monotonously came from the darkness. I also deflated for a second, trying to digest what I had heard. What I had heard a minute before with the same pauses, with the same intonation, and with the same voice. I don't know what came over me at that moment, but I stammered, completely unexpectedly. Oh, Laura, is that you?
I said, come here.
It wasn't our friend's voice anymore. The silence of the forest was pierced by some kind of demonic roar, which made Charlie and me fall to the ground in a stupor. Tears of panic froze in our eyes. Almost simultaneously, we began to hysterically crawl back into the forest, already understanding that nothing good would come of this. And from the darkness of the door came heavy, rapid knocks on the wooden floor. We didn't even have time to understand what was happening. Then, straight at us came flying, for God's sake, human legs. Crooked, blue-white limbs in an incomprehensible way were running toward us, horribly crunching and limping. We shrieked and took to our heels. The legs of the unknown creature were never a step behind, chuckling in Laura's voice. The absurdity of the situation made us speed up as much as possible. Charlie kept stumbling and whimpering, and I pulled him by the sleeve, crying as well. We didn't remember the way and ran at random. The forest didn't end but only became thicker and darker, as if we were moving in a completely opposite direction. Our strength began to fail us, and I made a desperate move. I pulled my friend with me into a deep ravine. We tumbled down the clay slope and lay down in the bushes, clamping our mouths with our hands. And somewhere over our heads, branches were cracking.
Last one down is a rotten egg. Don't need adults. I'll show you something. Come here.
The incoherent phrases of that terrible creature were echoing. Charlie was silently sobbing into his fist, clinging to my shoulder. What's more, I myself was already mentally saying goodbye to life. Various scraps of thoughts began to come to my mind, like my dad bought me a shiny plane, how I showed it off in the yard, how we launched fireworks for the new year, how I first learned to swim. My whole life, hanging by a thread, flashed before my eyes.
Found you.
Suddenly and loudly, the legs shouted, standing right above us. We burst out of the bushes like a bullet and rushed to run again. The demonic limbs leaped off the cliff straight at us and, missing us, landed with a thud on the ground. I turned around for a second. The legs, like caterpillars, writhed on the soft clay and tried to get up. Taking advantage of this, I hysterically urged Charlie to break away. A fallen spruce caught our eye. We were on the right track. Running another dozen meters, we flew out into a familiar place. Without looking back, we ran with cries into the yard and collapsed in convulsions in the middle of the playground, bursting into tears. Everything that happened after was like in a fog. Adults immediately surrounded us. I heard their voices, but from horror and fatigue, I couldn't understand what they were talking about. Then, I only remember the smeared screech of an ambulance siren, and then darkness. I sat at home for several days. My mom gave me hot tea with valerian. Later, she told me that she sat over my bed at night, now and then putting me back when I jumped up in a sleepy delirium and choked. Mom quietly cried day after day, watching my suffering. During all this time, I didn't say a word. Only at the end of the second week did the shock completely release me, and I somehow told my parents the details of that ill-fated evening. Gradually, I grew up and forgot about this nightmare, dismissing it as a childish imagination. But one day, the chilling events of the past made themselves known with new force. While sorting through boxes of photo albums at our country house, I came across an old photo. It showed Charlie and me, sitting on a bench near the house. My gaze suddenly stopped at Laura. Full of joy, the eyes of that young girl looked at me from the brown and white picture. And only now did a thought mature in my head. After that day, we never saw her again. No one saw her or mentioned her. Everyone forgot about her. It's as if she had disappeared from this world. It's as if Laura had never existed. This irrational circumstance ate into my brain and began to scratch at it with sharp claws. In a rush of these thoughts, I approached my mom and, as if programmed, asked, "Mom, what happened to Laura?" My mom suddenly turned pale and silently sat down on a chair. She immediately understood what I was talking about. After a long breath, my mom began. "Son, forgive me. I should have realized that sooner or later you would remember everything. I should have told you about this sooner. The thing is, a few days before that, Laura disappeared without a trace. The whole yard was looking for her, they called the police. All to no avail. And then, when you and Charlie told us that you were walking with her that day, Dad, together with the neighbors, went to comb the forest and found Laura dead, and not just dead, but torn to pieces. Some scoundrel had brutally dealt with her. All that was left of the poor girl were her legs and a piece of ribbon, which they used to identify her remains. After that incident, her parents were found in the apartment, and next to them was an open package of rat poison. They couldn't bear the loss of their beloved daughter. We told you kids that Laura had moved with her mom and dad. We wanted to protect you from the harsh truth, to erase her from your memory like a bad dream. But now you know the truth, son. Now you know everything." Mom burst into tears again, and I walked over to her, sat down next to her, and hugged her. "And the house? Did they find the house in the forest? Laura hid in the house alone then?" "No, there was no house there, just forest and swamp," Mom started to say. But I was barely listening to her. I was connecting the disparate pieces of the past together. It turns out that it wasn't Laura with us that day. From the very beginning, it wasn't her. Someone or something specifically lured us into the forest in order to then deal with us just as inhumanely as with our friend, but we miraculously managed to escape. What we encountered then still remains a mystery. Maybe it's an evil spirit, or a demon, or some other dark entity that took possession of Laura. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it feeds on us and lives in that house. in the house that is and which is not. Therefore, if you are walking through the forest and you see an old house there, then by no means and under no circumstances enter it.